All right. We always wait for a minute to see how we're set up here. And then we're going to go right for it, folks. Happy Sunday to everybody. Setting up. I hope your Sunday was well. We had great weather where I am. Okay, we're going to start right here. Folks, thanks for being here. And for those who can't be here for the live, we hope that you're going to check out the when it's actually on line for you to watch and to see as history. So it will be a historical video that will be on my YouTube channel. Thank you for being here. Subscribe, like, and comment below. We're building it as we fly, but we think the content is good. So we want to make sure that you are a part of this as we go forward here. I was got to get my glasses straight and stuff, and that looks quite the way I need to look here, but we're going to try and fix it as much as we can. All right. All right. I am Curious Formula. I'm your host, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Byron Donald's comments. And again, unless your head has been, you're an ostrich and your head has been in the sand on some level, you've heard this comment. You've heard this comment pretty strongly. Representative Byron Donald's comment that there were more traditionally intact Black families during Jim Crow than today. Ergo, Black people were in a better place as a result. Strong families obviously make strong positions in society to achieve. It should follow, right? But now, before we get into sort of the problems that I have, I think other people have with his comments, even if some of us may agree to an extent, I put that caveat in there. But here's my disclaimer before we get into that. I have a lot of Black Republican friends and hold some conservative views myself, as do I think most African Americans. Check polling to verify most of that. I even get what he was trying to say about intact traditional families, right? Fatherlessness in the Black community is at an epidemic level. Over 70% of Black households are led by single Black women, and the statistics about what happens to Black youth when the father is not in the home are staggering and have a lot to do with the state of the Black community. I don't think anybody denies that going forward. But we in the progressive world need to acknowledge that more readily and include it, I think, in our policy prescriptions. And yes, we must acknowledge that Donald Trump received 19% of the Black male vote in 2020 and is likely to get over 20%, I think, in 2024, if we're going to be honest here. But here's where today's Black Republicans, in my estimation, really mess up. And Representative Donald's comment illustrates this. Black families in Jim Crow were more traditionally intact, but data from that time clearly shows that these families were also, here's your checklist, right? Economically insecure due to Jim Crow, regular victims of state-sanctioned violence due to Jim Crow, lacking in upward mobility as a group due to Jim Crow, lacking the ability to access quality higher education and quality K-12 education, what it later became known as, due to Jim Crow, lacking in protection from law enforcement due to Jim Crow, lacking in receiving government services that their tax dollars paid for due to Jim Crow. And what do you mean by some of that? Well, the GI Bill is a good example from World War II, right? The housing and education benefits that were bestowed upon almost all soldiers of every race, of every creed, were denied specifically and deliberately by government action to African American soldiers. I think about the land rush of 1889, that when the federal government opened land in the West and said whoever gets there first at a certain time and plants their flag in the ground. You saw the movie about it with Tom Cruise, right? That, you can then have land and start your family and build a community, right? There were no African Americans that were allowed in there. Again, state-sanctioned government at work and not for the benefit of Black people. Not to mention the list of Black racial massacres of these intact Black families, right? So when Black families were together and were moving and doing things post-Civil War, right? Families that built communities that were in many places better than many of the white communities that were nearby. Um, uh, and we have a list here. I have a small list here because there were literally dozens of Black racial massacres that actually occurred. You want the list? Here's the list. In 1863, a Black racial massacre happened in New York. 1868, Opolis. I'm even I'm butchering this. Opelousas, Louisiana, 1868. St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, 1866. New Orleans, Louisiana, 1868. Camellia, Georgia, 1873. Colfax, Louisiana, 1874. Eufaula, Alabama, 1866. Memphis, Tennessee, 1875. Clinton, Mississippi, 1874. Vicksburg, Mississippi, 1887. Thibodore, Louisiana, 1898. Wilmington, North Carolina, 1906, when my fraternity was started. Atlanta, Georgia, 1910. Slocum, Texas, 1908. Springfield, Illinois, 1919. Elaine, Arkansas, 1919. Washington, D.C., 1917. East St. Louis, Illinois, 1919. Chicago, Illinois, 1921. Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? 1923, Rosewood, Florida. 1943, Detroit, Michigan. And the list is on. There were really dozens of towns started by Black families that created all kinds of businesses and thriving communities that many white people today say Black people have never created, right? Why can't they help themselves? Why can't they pull themselves by their own bootstraps? These Black families that were intact were all driven out of these successful communities. And I can name dozens more, but these are just to give you a highlight of some of those that were destroyed. And what happened when those places were destroyed and Black families moved up north? Well, they moved up north and Jim Crow stopped them from getting loans to buy houses, to start businesses, and redlining kept them living in public housing built for World War II soldier families as temporary housing, and until they could save money to move to a home. Black families living in housing meant to be temporary for generations as their infrastructure fell apart all around them, trapped in poverty but intact, is another sort of way that these wonderful Black families that were traditionally intact were discriminated upon and put in a second-class position economically and otherwise by Jim Crow, right? You do know that this housing that was built, I'm just going to take a slight digression here, this housing that was built for these soldiers, again, was meant to be temporary. So when Black families moved in there and were not basically allowed to move out because they could not find ways economically to get out, the walls got worn down, right? The elevators got worn down. There was no recreation built into these places. And so kids and families were stacked on top of each other with lack of jobs, lack of economic development happening around them, and an infrastructure that was not meant to be for people to live there 20 and 30 years. But that's in fact what happened. And we see some of that today. I'm a former city councilman in Newark, New Jersey. And when I tell you that there was a reason why most of the old public housing authority buildings had to be blown apart was because they were just not fixable at a certain time. In the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, they were just not fixable because they weren't meant for people to live in for long periods of time. But when you don't have a choice, that was the only place several intact Black families actually had to live. You remember Good Times. Good Times was a comedy, but it was based on fact. This was a intact Black family that was forced to live in rundown slum projects, tenements. These are the ones that we're talking about. And the weird thing about it, old Black Republicans really understood these facts of history, right? Many lived it, many lived through it. And they never simplified or romanticized or misrepresented what Jim Crow did to destroy Black families, even in social settings, chilling and smoking cigars, which is where Representative Donald appears to be doing when he made his comments, right? They did not belittle its effects, even as they did not use it as a crutch or as an excuse not to succeed, right? The University of Washington College of Arts and Science, in an article written by Nancy Joseph, and I'm reading verbatim here, entitled "For Black Republicans, A Dramatic Shift" from the year 2023. This is when the article was written. She answers the question in her mind of when did the Black Republicanism of Jackie Robinson and Senator Edward Brooks, shout out to the frat, Art Fletcher, who was a prominent Republican who, get this, is the father of affirmative action. Not white Democrats, not Black Democrats, not Democrats at all. A strong, well-respected Republican, Art Fletcher, is the father, the inventor, and the person who campaigned to get affirmative action to be the law of the land. And Colin Powell morph into the Black Republicanism of Larry Elder or Thomas Sowell and Candace Owens and the Hodge twins and Officer Tatum, just to name a few, right? The answer she gives is the lure of the prestige and influence. By being spokespersons willing to toe the new conservative party line, they gain access to power, prestige, and visibility on par with their Democratic counterparts. And it's easier to climb the GOP ladder. Folks, I make no qualms about this. There are people who are African American who have made a mint being sort of the soothsayer, the carrier of the Democratic Party values and issues and positions on issues throughout the country. They have TV shows that are funded. They're on mainstream media shows. They have podcasts. They have all kinds of social platforms. They work in the White House. They work in Congress. And then they go out and have these careers where they're basically, touting a position. Nothing wrong with that. It's nothing illegal about it. It's nothing bad about it. It's people are talking issues and people pay them for their opinions. But it's also hard to get into place, right? And so there are many, as this article is pointing out, who find that they can get the same kind of podcast dollars and the same kind of access to huge crowds, millions of people and followers, right? That they can be on television and be prognosticators and be pundits and be social commentators, right? And do so because there's not a lot of African Americans trying to fill that spot within the Republican Party or on that conservative side or on Fox News or a number of other places. And you'll see some of these people who you've never seen any place else ever before, who don't have a degree in political science, have never worked on campaigns but they're willing to tout a perspective. They're willing to say certain things. One example is you look at the Hodge twins, who I referenced a little bit earlier. Hodge twins were some guys who were kind of funny. They're twins. They're good looking. They lift weights. They're weightlifters, right? And I used to watch them, especially during the pandemic. They have really funny takes on videos, and they come off as simple and whatever. And somewhere along the line, they had about 200,000 to 300,000 followers on YouTube. And all of a sudden they switched and became sort of these very strong conservative Republican types and actually pushing. They may have always been that, but it became part of their content, right? And they went to like 1.5 million followers after that. Why? Because they tapped into something that would get them more likes, get them more follows. And now they don't just comment on funny things. They comment on things and put a conservative Republican sort of spin on them, right? The same thing with this Officer Tatum, who you watch, who, again, I don't refute or despise them for having the opinions that they have, but I think it's very convenient that they're mouthpieces for sort of a traditional conservative Republican way of looking at things. And not even really traditional conservative, really. It's really a MAGA way of looking at things, the Donald Trump way, the in-your-face kind of way of doing things, the nastiness of it, right? The belittling of Black people while you do it. It's kind of like their thing that they're invested in, right? That to point out the hypocrisy of the left, they have to somehow way sort of humiliate Blackness as a result of that. And that's what's so offensive. And I think that's what's different. I can remember a time when I had some good friends who were in the Republican Party, and I was a young scalawag of a political person myself, and president of the Essex County Young Democrats in the county that I was in, and trying to push reforms there and the like. And I remember meeting a good friend of my family who were Republicans, moderate Republicans, who said, "Man, you know what you could do if you were just a Republican instead of a Democrat? How far your trajectory would go in terms of influence and your electability, and you would be you could run probably for lieutenant governor in a few years if you had that banner." Now, the person was being funny and whatever, but there is more opportunity as a young African American male or female within a party that doesn't have a lot of us in there, particularly if you're pretty smart, and particularly if you're actually a well-spoken person, and particularly if you're up on the issues very well, right? So there is some kernel of truth to that, because I kind of experienced that myself. And that's what's interesting to me. Pew Research spoke to some facts about Black Republicans in 2022, and they called it 10 facts about Black Republicans compared to Black Democrats. And I want to kind of go through them because some of the findings I think were pretty obvious, and some of them were actually quite surprising. Number one, they said Black Republicans are younger than Black Democrats. That means the future, quite frankly, is theirs. Number two, they have similar income profiles to Black Democrats. That means they're not more affluent than Black Democrats. That was surprising to me. Third thing was half of them live in the South. It's the same number as Black Democrats. That means that they are your neighbors. They're a part of the nation with the highest concentration of Black people. The fourth thing was they're less likely than Black Dems to attend Black churches. That means that they're less religious or are not adherent to traditional Black church and its liberation theology. The fifth thing was they're less likely to say being Black is a significant part of their personal identity. And that means they see themselves as something other than Black first. It might be American, it might be Christian, it might be male, female, human being, non-racial, etc. Right? They also talked about number 6 on this list is surprise here. They are about as likely as Black Dems to see their ancestry as important to how they see themselves. They have a belief in Black family, and they are not sellouts. They recognize their past, and maybe not in the same way as Black Dems, but there is some understanding about ancestry. The seventh thing was, no surprise here, they're less likely to express a sense of linked fate with Black people in the U.S. That means they embrace the individualism and the Horatio Alger myth, right? They eschew group identity to a certain extent, right? And have kind of bought in to into the traditional white conservative thinking when it comes to these types of issues. The eighth thing was, and this is another surprise, as likely as Black Dems are to report they're as likely, as Black Dems to report frequent experiences of discrimination. I'm at a loss here. I really don't understand that. The ninth thing was that the Black Republicans differ in their views on racial discrimination as a barrier to progress. And I think, again, that's something that's pretty obvious, right? They have an embracing of traditional white conservative viewpoints on race, and that has dominated the party. They have dominated the parties really since 1980 in the Reagan takeover. The 10th thing is they're just as skeptical about the prospects for equality. And that's confusing since I am unsure how Black Republicans actually define equality. And I think there may be a difference in that respect to Black Democrats. And there are differences between white Republicans and Black Republicans, but I think there are more differences actually between Black Republicans of today and Black Republicans from 20 to 50 years ago. And whatever the future, folks, if I'm being honest here, somebody who looks at the totality of the circumstances politically, what's happening, and the questions that sort of new generation Black folks are asking as opposed to other generations of Black folks, I think it is a brighter on more issues than how can I say this? I think the future is brighter on more issues than Democrats. So let me go back here. We're live, so I'm trying to find a way to say it and not sound like I'm crazy. Whatever the future is going to be about Black Dems and Black Republicans, I do think it is brighter on more issues than Democrats are willing to admit or understand for Republicans. And what I mean by that is that I think Black Republicans are at least willing to talk about issues in different ways than maybe Black Democrats have been willing to do so on a lot of issues that have a lot of sway with Black voters, and Black Democrats to their detriment ignore these issues going forward. And issues I'm talking about are like public school choice, entrepreneurship, traditional values, and taxes, right? For me, I wish Black Republicans would embrace the philosophy and worldview of Black Republicans like Arthur Fletcher and Senator Edward Brooke, as I mentioned before, and even white Republicans like Jack Kemp and former New York City Mayor John Lindsay, the likes of the Hodge twins and Officer Tatum and white Republicans like Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, I don't think there's anything wrong with our community embracing republicanism, right? As late as 1960, 64, even in 65, the Republican Party could count on between 35 and 45% of the black vote. And that wasn't out of any kind of oddness or these were real choices, because the Republican Party in many ways was more hospitable and open to African Americans and other people of color coming into the party, because it wasn't wedded to one ideology within the Republican Party. There were conservative black Republicans, there were moderate black Republicans, there were liberal black Republicans, and they all were working for the liberation of their people. And I think it speaks more to the party than it does the idea of conservatism, right? I would much rather see a conservative who is fighting for the liberation of black people in many instances. And what do I mean by that? Well, what's a good example? Louis Farrakhan is a major conservative. He's not a Republican. He certainly is not somebody who you would think is, if you look at what he stands on issues, but he's very much a conservative. He's all about marriage and family and eschewing cigarettes and drugs and drink and having a spiritual walk with God and living out the life that God intends for you. He's about modest dress and entrepreneurship, and he's about economic nationalism for black people. He's for not depending on government programs. He's for making sure that you don't have sex before marriage. He's anti-abortion. He has real problems with the gay and lesbian community. He is a walking conservative, and he's very critical of African Americans and our behavior. And some kind of way, black folks are not offended when Louis Farrakhan lectures us, right? And I put us in that realm too, because I'm included as well, because they don't see him as being disingenuously not connected to his people and not connected to being part of the solution to the problem, and not just wagging a finger one way saying, this is what you all are doing. You all are dumb for being on the Democratic plantation. Louis Farrakhan would tell you shouldn't be on any political party's plantation, that you should be doing for self. And I think that black Republicans who at least embrace conservatism, if they're not going to embrace the policies of an Art Fletcher or Republicans of old who were the stalwarts of the party in the 60s and the 70s up to the 80s, they at least have to be seen as loving black people and wanting to what's best for black people, because the service and the life they've led has been centered with black people. So I think the problem with Byron Donald's comments at the end of the day is not that he made them, not that he may not have some facts and data to support them. It's that people don't think he is genuine and concerned for black people to make comments like that. And the way he made those comments does not show the same kind of love, the same kind of black-centeredness that we have come to expect of our leaders, who can definitely wag a finger and tell us when we're not doing what's right. But we expect that daddy kind of love from them, because we know at the end of the day, they will give their lives, have given their lives to support us and make us better. And until black Republicans are showing that or doing that, it will always come off as MAGA and blackface. But tell me what you think. Like and subscribe here. Make sure you leave a comment. Tell me what you think about this. Share this with others. We're building it as we fly. We're going to have some new content coming out this coming week, hopefully, fingers crossed. We're putting together a new team to help us grow this platform. I think the 1,000 and I think 14 of you all who are here, and the 2,000 or so that are on TikTok. Please like and subscribe to my other channels as well on other platforms. And once again, remember, stay curious and think. It ain't illegal yet.